welcome back, everyone. We're up for our next panel, PICS, PICS, PICS. This will be moderated by Josephine Bosma. This is the only one I'll introduce right now, and I'll leave the other introductions over to Josephine. Josephine is a journalist and a critic. She's based in Amsterdam and has done a lot of work about art in the context of the internet. You might be familiar with her public 2011 publication, Netitudes, which also helped shape the discourse about net art and beyond. Josephine?
So, hello everybody. This is the first artist panel. Very shortly I'll be introducing Rafaël Rozendaal, Jonas Lund and Holmberg to you. So this panel is supposed to be discussing materiality in post-internet art. Now this is a very difficult topic, and one of the problems for me with this topic is that it sounds very simple to discuss, but really what we have here on stage, and I hope that it really comes through in the separate presentations, is three very individual approaches. So these artists have a very individual style, way of working with the digital, with physical materials, and with the gallery space. So, is this funny? Okay. Well, without further ado, I'd like to introduce the first speaker to you, because we have to move like really fast. This is Rafaël Rozendaal, one of Holland's rising art stars, I could maybe even say right now. I'll leave it to you. I think you don't need introduction, do you?
Yeah, I do. I'll introduce myself. Hello, I'm Rafaël Rozendaal. I was born in the Netherlands. I live in New York. And I love the internet. I always did. So I started before the whole post-internet story. And I started because I saw there was a lot of Dutch internet art. I think there's a good climate here for internet art. And I just felt empowered. Like there's a browser and you can just do something. And I always wanted to make funny things growing up. But I became a bit more serious now, but in the beginning, and I would go to art spaces and everything was very serious, so I assumed that I would never be invited in any art space. I said, there's no way they're going to show my stuff because it's funny and everything in the art space is serious. So I thought on the internet I can be myself. Then as time moved on, then the art spaces started noticing things that happened on the internet and they started inviting me. And I want to show just a little thought. All my work is on the internet and it's in domain names. So it's always a very small idea isolated in a domain name. And this is one example. If you can click on the first link. So if you can move the mouse around. So the website is called Mosquito. Yeah, you can pause now. Thank you. So when you're not moving, there's silence, and when you move, your cursor makes the sound of a mosquito, and the cursor is kind of a small insect, and so it kind of looks like a mosquito, and it talks about movement and interactivity and sound and the connections in your brain, but in a simple, funny way. And this is typically the idea that if I had been asked to make a big exhibition, this would not have been what I had proposed, but because it's the internet, you don't worry too much. You're like, okay, this is a funny idea. It's a little wish inside me that wanted to materialize, and I'm not going to question why. Because if you have an exhibition, then you have to sit down with the curator and like, what are you trying to say? How can we accomplish this? What is going on in the world today? Are you critical of your medium? Who are you angry at? And blah, blah. And you start talking, and it becomes a very different thing. So I think the internet is a place for unimportant thoughts. That's very different. Art is a place for important thoughts that you can defend. And the internet is a place for cat videos and drooling babies and things like this. So that was the original one. Then I was asked by W139 to do an exhibition, and it's a space maybe twice this room. And the curator asked, what do you want to show? Do you want to show a lot of your websites? Do you want to show something else? And I said, I would like to translate this mosquito piece into an exhibition. So we painted the whole space black, and only one visitor was allowed in at the same time. And so you would enter the door and just see a black space, and you couldn't see a thing. You walk around, and if you walk, you hear the sound of a mosquito, and if you stop, there's silence. So if you can show the video, it's this tab. So, and what's funny is that when you make exhibitions, it's a lot less spontaneous than the web. So I approached the curator, I said, I want to do this, and he said, oh, it's an interesting idea, but there's a lot of budget cuts, so I have to defend this idea to the city council, because they've been complaining that we show unimportant stuff, and now I have to tell them why we need money for this mosquito. And then I told them, well, I calculated how we're gonna do the interaction with different sensors throughout the space, and it turned out to be so complicated. So then I said, let's just put a security camera, and we'll put an intern in the back, and they'll press pause and play on the sound. But the point of my story is that maybe, I didn't count, but maybe 1,000 people saw this exhibition. And the website, I don't know why, but a lot of people go to my websites. And the other website probably, all my websites together is about 30 million people a year. And the website has been up for 10 years, so maybe 20 million people saw that website. So it's a very different number. So then people always talk about things being virtual, because we're used to art objects having actual physical weight. But we never spoke about movies being virtual or songs being virtual, because you can't carry them. So I think the word virtual is a bit weird. The only thing I want to say is that this experience of the same idea, either in a huge room with budget and city council and people working on it, or the tiny idea on the website, the tiny idea on the my point is that this one is really hard to document. A painting exhibition you can document. You know what paintings look like, you understand. This is impossible. Even if you saw the YouTube without my story, you probably would have been like, what the fuck is this? So my point is that the website is way more real than the exhibition, because the exhibition was only seen by a few people. And now I'm telling you the story and you're imagining it. That's virtual. When I tell you a story and you're imagining it in your head. Whereas the website, you can just go home and look at it, and you can look at it in the morning and in the evening. So websites are not virtual at all. That's my point.
Okay, the next speaker is Jonas Lund. I'm sorry I didn't give you a proper introduction. I had one written for you as well. So, Lund moved from photography to making works on the web, on Twitter and on Facebook. Many of his works are highly social, on the verge of relational aesthetics, I would almost say. Especially his paint shop and Paint Your Own Pizza. And so, since 2 years, Lund systematically addresses art world structures in his work. Lund develops tools and strategies to get a grip on systems of valuation in art. His work often merges on and offline spaces. He merges those into one art object or event. Jonas.
Hi. This is the button. Ah, cool, works. Hi, I'm Jonas Lund. Thanks so much for inviting me, and thanks for everyone who's here. It's great. So it's kind of hard to talk about materiality in 5 minutes, but I will show one piece that kind of summarizes a lot of the things I'm busy with at the moment. As Josephine said, I will look at art world structures, art market, contemporary art production through different uses of technology or programming, algorithms, big data, databases, and different ways of doing that. So what you're looking at is an install shot from an exhibition called Flip City, which is a series of 40 paintings. This is at Steve Turner in Los Angeles. It was shown last year around this time. The paintings were all produced over the course of 4 weeks leading up to the exhibition. It's digital printed paintings, so kind of paintings that starts as JPEGs. they have a little bit of acrylic gel on top of it to make it sort of painterly with an artist touch of it. The title of the show refers to the kind of central position LA took in something that's been known as the flip market or flipping or flip collectors, which is largely kind of informed by Simkovich. He's the guy who kind of popularized it and turned it into the kind of what people know and talk about. It's basically collectors, for those who aren't aware, it's basically collectors who aggressively buy a lot of works from very emerging artists for not much money, and then through some kind of manipulation of hype and branding, position these works in different situations and then resell them quickly for a pretty dramatic profit. So the most famous example is Oscar Murillo in combination with Simkovich, where Simkovich bought around 20 to 40 paintings, no one really knows for sure, for something like $1,000 each, and then can sell them at auction for $300,000-400,000 at their peak. So you can get a crazy return of investment. No one really knows if this is good or bad for artists yet. Some people benefit really greatly for their market and their career, and others suffer a bit more. My interest was in the kind of thing itself, like how does it operate? How does it work? What can I do within that sphere? So all the paintings in the show are outfitted with GPS trackers on the stretcher bar. So the GPS tracker allows the painting to update its own location once a day. So as they move around in the network, I see exactly where they are all the time. But not only me, but also, the locations are shared online. So everyone can see how they're moving around. And then, so you see this painting move to Compton. And this one has been touring around. It's also interesting when they're shipped to art fairs and stuff, you can see exactly how the art shipping works, like what's the stops in the transit. So the GPS tracker works on a TCP socket. It has a SIM card inside of it, and then it just sends like a text message to my server, and then that's charged. Each painting comes with a terms of ownership attached to it, which basically stipulates that the collector who buys it cannot tamper with the GPS device, and they have to register their ownership for the express purpose of replacing the battery, which will last for 3 years. So in kind of summary for the talk about materiality, this show consists of one virtual private server, which accepts the messages, website, terms of ownership, 40 GPS trackers, 40 prepaid SIM cards, 40 paintings, 1 gallery, and 34 collectors. So, thank you.
So the last introduction, our last speaker introducing his work is Joel Holmberg, the only one I hadn't met before. He's one of the founding members of the Nasty Net Surfing Club, a collaborative art blog. Holmberg makes often humorous works, well, so does everybody else here, I believe, from online performance type works to sculpture and prints, which is not always easily filed under the post-internet art label, I would say. His exhibition, Soft Law, from 2013 would be an example of, not maybe fitting the usual post-internet label. You can disagree with me. His exhibition, Witness, last year was even described as extending beyond art that has been described as post-internet. So I'm very curious what you will say.
Thank you. Doesn't fit. Can I use one of these? Hello? How are the levels? Good? So if you open the VLC player and just put it full screen, the cone, and just double click, there we go. One, Holmberg often cites having overcome his father's vasectomy as having inspired him to continue to take on challenges. 2, we've been scrolling for years and there's so much more to load. 3, web developers called it lazy loading, but it required a considerable effort. 4, when it comes to his exhibition history and creative output, Joel Holmberg's parents have nothing to be proud of, as it didn't have anything to do with them. 5, there's no point in making something seem hard. It is nice to make things seem easy. 6, it will soon be unlawful to separate content from its metadata or distribute a file without a digital fingerprint. Could you hand me the water right there? 7, there is nothing spiritual about an office job unless you take into account that Christianity invented bureaucracy. Haha. 9, the grass is always more HD. 12, an early work consisting of a smoke detector with low batteries and a text that reads, "The beep is a reminder to try and focus on things in life that we can change." 13, Rome wasn't built because no one had shit going on that week. 14, the more we scroll, the more we load. 15, he often wrote his best emails on reserve battery. 16, Blanchot has referred to the writer as being in a state of désoeuvre, a condition of doing nothing brought upon by an immobilizing sense of urgency. 17, when he accidentally got salsa on an honorarium check. 18, he never actually wrote the Wikipedia article for Studio Visit because he preferred it to exist in the realm of conversation topics. 19, on Thanksgivings, he gave thanks for the gift of fear while repeatedly insisting that fear was a gift. 20, Holmberg's law states it is impossible to be mugged if all you think about is preventing yourself from being mugged. 23, he is to ones and zeros what Buren is to stripes. 24, during those years, pages took forever to load. 26, in the early 2020s, Holmberg became known for bringing back the mocking crybaby gesture into the popular imagination. 27, when the movie 300 was released, the theatrical trailer claimed that it featured over 1,400 visual effects, but no one knows if they were telling the truth. 28, in the fall of 2012, Holmberg had reoccurring dreams that the world economy depended on his clout score. 29, he had the highest rated podcast about regrets. 30, his controversial photographic series, Children Alone in Taxis, involved putting his kids in taxis alone and taking a picture of their sad faces as they drove away. 32, explaining what RAM is to people who are distracted, where the artist explains the concept of RAM to people who aren't paying attention. 34, in archaeologist terms, we live on what is called made ground. 35, topography refers not only to the geography, but its inhabitants and how they have established themselves within the landscape. 36, Topology is a term used to describe how a network is organized, which in turn describes how power is distributed throughout the network. 37, each network topology carries with it a political temperament. 38, he often described his neighbors in terms of their wireless networks. 39, that summer, wireless was everywhere, passing through their skins and altering their bodies according to bandwidth. 40, my role as an artist with a data plan is analogous to my role as an artist. 41, my role as an artist on Yahoo Answers is analogous to my role as an artist. 42, my role as an artist with a gallery show is analogous to my role as an artist. 43, art is ancient. 44, how many ancient things are there left for us to do? 45, were the 1700s that much different from the 1800s? 49, now the work is finished. Soon it will be sitting in a gallery. After that, we will decide how it will be arranged. Then the opening will happen and everything will change. 53, perhaps another way to say window of opportunity is the fenestration of time. 54, his forthcoming documentary titled Watch and Learn, A Master at Work. 56, the artist's interest in structural integrity is rooted in the object's capacity of supporting its own weight. 62, the depth of a display device depends on the technology. 63, NTSC stands for never the same color, and these bursts of color change moment by moment. 66, everyone has an Adam Carolla in their lives, but it is reassuring to know that history only remembers the Jimmy Kimmels. 69, every joke needs a victim. 70, every drone needs a victim. 71, in a podcast episode about his earliest sexual experience, he recalls sneaking a girl in through the basement only to find that the black light made her look hideous. 73, art doesn't change, but people can be changed by art.
So that was, as I said before, 3 very different approaches and types of presentations as well. I asked the artists to prepare some statements to get into. Now, Joel's statements were a little bit cryptic, let's say. So I would like to ask you, Joel, what were these statements? Were they quotes, thoughts? What were they?
There were thoughts. I think they speak for themselves.
So, do you also have anything to say about the materiality in your work, though?
Well, I think that everything needs to be considered. And my work has changed and continues to change. And it took a very important shift a few years ago when I realized that I did not like the work I was making as much as I liked my website. So I began to make paintings of my website. And my website, I use a content management system. We call it a CMS in ShopTalk. And I use professional templates that small businesses use to give themselves like a voice of authority. And also in the language that I chose to read, and also the language that appears in my text-based work, I think this voice, this voice of authority also comes through in that. Like as if it's legitimizing itself, even though it's ambiguous.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. So this would mean that of all three artists here, your work is the most visual, right?
Yeah, I think so.
So what is the main difference for you between visual work and work that's more conceptual? How do you feel there's a big distance between your work and your approach and that of Jonas and Joel's, for example?
Well, I think that the word conceptual is confusing because when you're doing something visual, it can still be conceptual. But you're just thinking in you're not thinking in words. You're thinking in shapes or in sounds. So I like to separate things as more narrative and non-narrative. That's how I see it. I don't see things as conceptual and visual, but I see things as more narrative. And so a work that you can describe and that has a beginning and an end, that's more of a narrative. And then a work that is more open, that's how I differentiate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I found a nice quote from you, where you say in an interview that I'm interested in movement and I'm interested in staring. That means I want to make moving images that don't have a beginning or ending, no specific duration. So you also write haikus.
Mm-hmm.
Are you very zen, Raphael?
No, I don't think so. No, but well, the haikus were the same thing, where you, just like his statements, it's about moments, like thoughts. And I like the idea that with art, you can create a moment that keeps on. Normally a moment passes, but then this moment keeps existing, and every time the work is seen, the moment happens again, but in a different way.
So, yes. I wanted to move to Jonas, but I have to make a nice bridge here, which
I can make it myself.
Okay, do that.
It's okay. So yeah, I just thought of it, conceptual versus aesthetic. Like in the US, people describe me as a conceptual artist, whereas in Europe, I'm just an artist. As if someone would need like the extra definition or push to understand that the work is beyond decoration. I find that quite interesting. And I also think, I used to think that decorative works, or like abstract works, were exclusively uninteresting because it was lacking a conceptual idea, but I've come to realize that even just aesthetically pleasing decorative works is still about concepts and ideas. So I kind of switched, but I find that quite interesting.
Can we make a historical note that the very mission of conceptual art is to eliminate the object. So by using the historical strategies of conceptual art without eliminating the object, maybe that's a whole nother panel in itself. But I don't think we should forget that is.
I think you're absolutely right on that one. Yeah,
Well, at the same time, I asked for statements up front, and Jonas sent me a few in email, and one that I found interesting was that he more or less is ambiguous on that particular topic that you raised there. So conceptual art may be expressed through objects as well, and in physical space. So how important are these objects? How important is that physical space still? So he says, nothing worse than a good idea executed poorly. The worst idea executed perfectly wins every time. So this means there is something in how you actually make the work, the object itself, tell the story. So in a sense, the material, the physical object still has a say, let's say.
Well, it can happen, of course, like the viewer, and I think the more I make my work and exhibit my work, the more I want to just hope that the viewer can understand what I'm asking them to consider. Like, maybe another example of...
Even if expressed poorly.
No, if it's expressed poorly, that's not generous to the viewer. It might be understood by an inner circle of people, but maybe going back to
it's not a real hard criticism on the object, but of course, as an artist, you cannot always express your concept perfectly. That you will always be lacking in some way. By the way, I want to stress that the three of you don't have to be extremely polite. You can just jump into the conversation anytime. Okay, Jonas?
Well, I don't like this idea of separating the object from the idea. So if you're saying that the perfect expression of the idea, but the object itself is the idea, that's like you can make a movie with great intentions, but if the movie is not doing its job, then...
But then how is it not just an extension of a Beaux-Arts tradition of painting and sculpture? There has been so much work that has been done to move past that, and now, I mean, we're all kind of or have at one point riffed on this bad boy painting look and its place in the market and on people's walls, and how much we need that kind of support, and ha ha ha, but ideas win every time, and I think that this go ahead, sorry.
Well, I just think that in my case, when I make work, it starts with an idea, then you make something, and whatever that is usually very different from what it was in your head, and then it starts to become another idea. So my point is that you cannot say, oh, I had an idea, and now I need to execute it perfectly, and then accidents happen, and that thing becomes the idea. It's not the electric signals that were in your brain. You have that entity there, and that's what the viewer encounters. So you're going to have to live with what that entity is.
To speak on materiality again, if I were to have an idea that I could just tell someone to make and execute it for me, like what Raphael's saying, that it would basically I would be denying my own opportunity to learn something in the process of making it.
What I meant with the statement of the good idea executed poorly was more like if you look at a work and you can see the idea, but you see the cracks in the idea because it's not been manufactured in such a way that the materiality disappears. Like if you make a work and if the construction itself is perfect, it also becomes invisible because you don't notice in some way.
And then for me, the difference with materiality, because there's different materialities, and there's sound, and and coming from the internet, it's such a generous thing where everyone can see it for free, and then you start making objects that are only available temporarily and then go into a vault. That was something strange for me to deal with. I still find strange. Morally, I think it's better to offer things for free, but then you might be interested in making objects, and then they have to be in an exhibition space.
Yes, in your email statement you said, with physical art, so with physical objects, the experience is mostly through documentation, which is virtual. So this is an interesting take, I think, that you turn it around and say, what I present online, everybody can see, and is really less virtual, if we can use that word for this, than the object in the gallery, because only
but that's if you make net art. If you make things for the browser, then people experience it in the browser, and they see that more than they see what you explained. So the exhibition, only a few people will see. The objects go in a vault afterwards, and the website anyone can access. But I don't know how you guys feel about that, about the destiny of the artwork just going into a rich person's home.
It's not an interesting conversation to me because they are taking on the responsibility of being a steward of the work. And I mean, you have written some contracts about your work, but I would hope, ideally, whoever decides to add my work to their collection will consider themselves the stewards of that work.
But a lot of the times these things end up in these zones that His Style, for instance, describes, or they will end up in a museum des Paul. So nobody sees them again. I know a lot of older artists that are very frustrated because their work has completely disappeared.
Yeah, but complaining, maybe that's, forget I said complaining, but like, I don't want to give that infrastructure any more power than it already has, because I would rather talk about like different ways to see the world around us.
But I'm saying if you make work for the internet, then people can still see it.
Right, but there's still a power structure in that the standards for browsers and like what I'm sure you had a very frightening moment when Apple tried to end Flash. And that could have been much more devastating than art storage going up in flames for you. That you would have to then have a virtual machine to run Flash in some free trade storage zone like you were describing.
But there will be a day pretty soon when Flash won't work, right? But will you have moved all...
What are you going to do?
Well, I consider each work has an educational value, and young people can see it and build upon it. And then if you're interested in interactive work, then you're going to have to display it on a computer, and there is a deterioration. But at least if it was available online for 10 years, at least a lot of people were able to see it. If I had distributed that work in a gallery and it would have been in an edition of 3 and it would have been behind closed doors all the time, much less people can learn from the work. Not saying that I have a lot of wisdom and people need, but any artwork I think is more valuable when it's seen by more people.
As artists, we make our own audiences. That's something I believe in, and if I were to, maybe if I would wonder if you to agree with me on that, but the audience that, for example, Jonas is creating with his work, I would be interested to know what he thinks.
And yeah, I don't think I choose it. I think they choose me. But of course, like by what I do, you narrow it down, sure. But I definitely don't think that quantity equals quality in terms of views. Like, definitely not. Like, just because, I mean, I think you say just because more people can see it doesn't make it better, right?
Well, it came out of I was in art school and I was interested in interactivity because I think it's a part of how you see the world and you hold things and you touch things. And I went to the library. I said, do you guys have any CD-ROMs? Because I'm interested in what happened in interactive art. And my library didn't have any CD-ROMs. And so I thought if interactive art is not online, then just nobody sees it. That was my frustration. So it's not about how many people get to see it, but that anyone can see it.
So then the primary purpose of producing is for an audience and not for yourself, I suppose.
No, the first thing is my interest, but then I think I would like to be able to view a lot of works easily, just like I can listen to music easily.
We're drifting a little bit from the topic, which is materiality, to views. And maybe it's not right to make a separation that's between the physical space and the online space as much, because, well, as the Brian Drucker quote goes, that post-internet artists make things to look good on a blog. So, what is that physical space anyhow?
Adding to that, most people who view websites and surf the internet do so in office hours. Like if you look at, I'm sure Raphael, it seems like he spends time looking at his traffic. Does this still hold true that people mostly look like at work while they're at their office? Because when people make new posts, they don't do it Friday at the end of the day. They do it Monday morning so they can get a lot of traffic. And like when you start to add that traffic coordinator mentality to your studio practice, it must create an interesting problem.
I would like to open this up to the audience, which is very eager. There's a microphone here. Can somebody move that to Florian over there? Yeah, Nathalie.
But I think, I don't know, do you post to Instagram at specific times? Do you know what's your like peak hour for most likes?
No, but if we're talking about materiality and browsing, I think that it's kind of, it's a little bit the elephant in the room that most people are like in front of their browser while they're at their office.
But at the
I'm
same
not sure
time,
that's true, though.
yeah, but for me, the internet is kind of,
Maybe that was more post-internet.
yeah.
I'm pre-post-internet that people looked at work.
I mean, I don't know if the office is the ideal place to view art, but museums are pretty problematic too, where you're surrounded by people who are having long conversations in front of you, and you only have 30 seconds in front of the work, and then you get pushed aside. So
It's like the Kindle, you know? It's like single purpose. You can't browse art and check Twitter. You can only look at the art. That's the point, I think.
So are you guys ready for your first question from the audience?
okay.
Yes.
I'm a little bit baffled by the panel discussion because it seems to be as if we're still rehashing this kind of 1990s cyber culture paradigm where, let's say, there's a virtual reality and there's a physical reality. So if you talk about materiality, you're talking about, let's say, the second. I think what should be pretty clear now, and which I actually really liked, Joel, in your video, that the materialities and any kind of materiality is really not a question of electronic versus non-electronic or physical versus non-physical, or we're dealing with all kinds of different materialities. I mean, that's also what I'm getting from your points in the discussion, and I think we could really see it in the way that, you know, showed the MacBooks in the convenience store. And so for me, if there's really a value, also in let's say a theoretical value in the term like post-internet, is that we finally get rid of this crap, you know, which is an ideology of the 1990s to say the internet is a virtual space, it's disembodied, it's immaterial. No, it isn't. It's running on data centers, it's running on servers, it's running on social constraints, etc., etc. And so we can very much juxtapose this to other forms of spaces. And I think, you know, any kind of discussion in these days in 2015 where we kind of juxtapose materiality to something like immateriality or virtuality is, yeah, hopefully outmoded.
I'm really surprised that you hear that in Joel's presentation, because he was talking about conceptual art all the time, which I don't think is the best way to address this kind of materiality that you were trying to put on the table now.
I think you read Joel's presentation in a totally different way than at least I read it, but maybe Joel can say something about it.
If I was talking about conceptual art the whole time, it's because that is the history and art that I feel most appreciative of in terms of its mission of eliminating the object and focusing on ideas.
Yeah, well, that's exactly what I said. You know, eliminating the object and focusing on ideas. That doesn't sound very material to me. But anyway, any other questions?
Have you, why is that not material to you? For artists to be.
Well, for me personally, I have a problem with it because all through my work in the past 20 years, I've been confronted with curators and critics from the contemporary art world who, every time they're confronted with any work from new media, from computers, from technical backgrounds, they look at it at one glance and say, it sucks, because they don't understand it, and they just don't get the idea, because they don't understand the materiality that expresses this idea. That's my problem with this way of speaking, with this approach.
Right, but the work that has been supported by institutions like specializing in post-internet and like it just sets the bar so low. Like it does not do the work justice to have a low bar set saying, oh, this is only an internet conversation. We need to elevate it.
What's low about it?
Well, if you are, why label it internet art, post-internet art? You're limiting it when you're doing that. And maybe that's an institutional problem, but I feel sorry that you've had these experiences, but I would not like to limit myself.
Well, that's the experience of most media artists and artists working with technology over the past decades. So this is, I think, a problem that we're trying to address also here in the International. That's why I put it on the table. Maybe this is something that, it's interesting that it comes up now, that the post-internet generation just doesn't feel it that way. If I can throw you all on into one label for the moment.
I think historically every art movement, artists have been uncomfortable with the label.
Absolutely.
Like the materiality between online, offline, yeah. It's like I never had any type of issue with that. It's all the same for me. Like, why make a distinction to begin with? It's all starts somewhere.
But the distribution is totally different.
Yeah, but not even. I mean, like, yeah, you make something in the gallery, it ends up online. You make something online, it's already like there's no difference, anyways. You know, like it's
the difference is that the internet, everybody can post something, and the gallery space you need permission.
Sure, yeah. It's just like one of these things you gotta do to make an art career. You know, like it's just one step. Like, I mean, if you make online stuff, the materiality starts with writing code. You know, it's like that's as material as making a painting.
No, yeah, but I don't think the making. I don't feel any difference whether you're making a drawing in MS Paint or on a piece of paper. That's not very different. But then placing the work for it to be seen, that's a totally different thing. Where on the internet you just post stuff without thinking too much, and a gallery show you work on it for a year, it is more focused. It's a very different tone of voice.
Yeah, that's true.
I want to illustrate my point with a review that I read of Flip City, of Jonas Lund's Flip City, by an American critic who says, these paintings are so awful. You know, how can anybody take this seriously? So this is where somebody completely misses the point of this show. And I think this is why we still keep discussing these matters in really quite awkward terms. And I'm at this point actually, Florian's question makes me wonder whether we're having the wrong discussion for this type of audience, and maybe we should have had this in the Stedelijk Museum or something. So
maybe I'll add another anecdote about like my interest in using the internet as a way, okay, so the White House has an official Flickr account. Flickr had to make a new type of Creative Commons license for the White House's Twitter account because the federal government cannot hold copyright, so it's licensed under some new kind of thing. Just so that they could have a social media imprint. the photograph of the iconic photograph of Obama and his team in the Situation Room looking at the raid of bin Laden was released to Flickr. And that's how it was distributed. And it's only the second most popular on Flickr. The most popular is still of like some sunset over a bridge and whatever, random thing. So they also maybe did not choose the right platform for their presence. And it's not really, it's an awkward integration with like all these thousands and thousands of I made a book of all the people who have favorited this Flickr photo of the bin Laden Situation Room, and that incongruous nature of that is kind of drives my work a lot of the time.
Because we're really getting into a lot of conversation behind the table here, I feel that the audience is very neglected, and really, I would like to invite you to join the conversation and maybe ask a question. Any other questions in the room? Yes.
This is for Jonas. I was curious because Josephine, you brought up how the critic of his Flip City show was talking about how the paintings were so terrible, but I'm curious, Jonas. I mean, I know that like the concept, even though we don't want to use that word necessarily, but the concept kind of led this series in that you wanted it to look like a type of painting. But for you, were you interested in them looking good? I mean, did you have a sort of aesthetic concerns around them, or was?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, because they only operate as painting objects if they look good, right? Like, because otherwise no one would buy them. So maybe, but luckily, like, there's many different opinions on like aesthetics. So maybe this critic missed the point of the comment. I don't know, yeah. But I think, yeah, for sure. I mean, it's pretty heavy selection process. I think from 200 different ones, it's like narrow it down to like 40 and then print those. And they're all kind of collages of like existing like flip works from auctions based on like optimized auction results, basically. So each painting is a combination of a query from a database saying, give me all artists who are younger than this, like, give me all 89 plus artists who resold for higher than two times the estimate. And then you get a selection of like 8 pictures. And then.
But the buyers of your works might actually also understand what the Flip City concept is, right?
I don't know, to be honest. I don't think so. Most of them not, I think. I think most of them aren't even aware that they have GPS trackers on the back. They're just like, oh, wow, maybe I can resell it in 2 years for a profit. Yeah.
There was another question there, Jan-Robert Leegte.
Yeah, I actually agree with Joel, really. I think you hit the nail with the materiality and the proprietary aspects of it. It's something I miss in the other two speaking about, especially with Jonas, because you're dealing with the ownership of materials, it's reselling everything. So how's your light on the proprietary issue of, let's say, internet materials, so hosting platforms, formats, stuff like that?
I'm pretty open source about everything. Like all the like code-based work I've done is on GitHub, so you can just like fork it. I think it's like, I guess that's like the benefit of having a painting, that the ownership is limited to one person, and then that makes it easier to operate as an art object. I think it's interesting in terms of Raphael also, because moving from Flash to JavaScript means that all of your work now is open source rather than closed, right?
Yeah, even the Flash work you can decompile. It's not so difficult.
Okay, another question. I think we have time for 1 or 2 more. No questions? Okay. Then I think we should just wrap this up and have a really nice lunch and go outside into the sun. Thank you very much for all having come here.
Thank you.